Hello, and welcome to the Logistics Management Podcast. My name is Jeff Berman. I am Group News Editor for Logistics Management Magazine, as well as the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group. Today, it's a real pleasure to welcome back Larry Gross to our podcast. Larry is a 40-plus year veteran of the freight transportation sector and president of Gross Transportation Consulting, located in Durango, Colorado. It's an independent consulting practice specializing in freight transportation matters. Larry is a knowledge expert on intermodal matters who makes frequent appearances before the transportation community that is. He has played a key role in the creation of educational content at the IANA Intermodal Expo for the past several years. He also enjoys teaching and has authored business case studies for use in the IANA Academic Challenge competition at the University of North Florida, as well as at the IANA Expo Academic Challenge. Prior to starting his consulting practice, Larry enjoyed a long career in intermodal equipment development and sales, and he is an individual most closely associated with the innovative Road Railer Intermodal System, an organization that he headed for over a decade. Welcome back, Larry.
Nice to be back with you, Jeff. Good afternoon, and good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. So let's get right into it, Larry. Let's take a look at the state of the freight economy as it relates to intermodal at the moment. There's obviously a lot of balls in the air when we look at what's going on in terms of inflation, retail sales, GDP, etc. I'll kind of uh, let you uh, take a dig into that to get us kicked off.
Sure. If we look at let's say the performance in 2025, and first of all, we have to remember that intermodal is really not one market, but two roughly equal size sectors. One which we'll call for shorthand international, the other domestic.
Yes.
And international refers to the movement of ISO containers, 20s, 40s, and a limited number of 45s into and out of the coasts, the ports regions. Domestic being the movement of 53-foot domestic containers and a dwindling number of trailers on flat car. And the reason that we look at these markets separately is because they really function very, very differently. The international market is keyed to what's happening with regard to our imports and our exports. And the domestic, while there is a significant transload component to it, is much more closely tied to what's happening with regard to our overall domestic long-haul truckload market. So they're
Right.
marching to different drummers. They respond to different market impetuses, and they behave very differently. If we look at the total intermodal performance in 2025, it ended the year up 2.3%. This is a North American number, so that's going to include Canada and Mexico. And this is based on the IANA ETSO database, which is
Okay.
equipment type, size, and ownership. That's the source for this data. 2.3% rise over the year, but a a 2% deficit in the fourth quarter. And where that deficit comes from is mainly international, because we saw a very strong performance for international in the first half of the year. And then things definitely tailed off as we went into through the second half. And that, of course, is due to the various push-pull effects of the tariff situation. And we had a tremendous amount of front-loading activity in the first half of the year, which was much stronger than normal seasonality would call for. And then, of course, we ended up paying the piper during the second half of the year, and volumes fell into a deficit position in the fourth quarter. On the domestic side, we ended the year slightly in the black, 1.6%. Again, these are North American numbers.
Okay.
And fourth quarter, just barely in the black by about a 0.5%.
Right.
So we saw very modest growth in domestic, but growth nonetheless. And roughly, not surprising given what we know what's going on in the trucking business, we didn't see much growth there either. And unless intermodal is taking share from long haul truck, you would expect it to more or less track what's happening there.
Okay.
Um, and that's in effect what happened. If we focus in on these individual markets just for a minute, the
Yeah.
geographic markets, U.S. for the year, this is volume that's both originating and terminating within the U.S. is up just 1%, international up 1.8, domestic up half a point. Canada was considerably stronger, uh, with 14% increase in international. That's a little bit exaggerated because they had a really tough time in 2024 with a lot of disruptions, various strikes, both railroad strikes and port strikes, which suppressed the volume in 2024, and so it made 2025 look better in comparison. And domestic was up over 7% for the year.
Okay.
Mexico was down about 5%. This is volume both uh, originating and terminating within Mexico, down about 5% for international, up strongly 7% for domestic. That domestic segment in the intra-Mexico market is really growing strongly. That resulted in an overall decline of just about a point for the year. And I'll close out this segment with the cross-border markets. And cross-border Canada is down about 10% for the international segment. There's not much domestic moving across the border. About 9 out of 10 of those containers crossing is international ISO containers. But the small domestic side grew nicely, but overall that volume was down about 9% in total, domestic and international. So that market continues to struggle. In contrast, we saw strong growth in the U.S. Mexico cross-border market. Overall volume up about 13.6% year over year, so growing much more strongly, I think, than truck crossings, and an indication that intermodal is taking some share in that market. Almost 99% of what's happening on the U.S.-Mexico border is domestic containers.
Sure.
There's a smattering of ISO containers crossing there, but it's all about domestic.
Okay. Okay. Great overview. Um, Larry, if you don't mind, I'd like to see if we could please just take a quick look back at the 2025 peak season from an intermodal perspective. You had just mentioned that Q4 year-end volumes were a bit off relative to earlier in the year for the reasons that you outlined. I'm just wondering, if we were just to look at peak on its own, how did it do compared to previous years? And I just ask because peak has meant different things to different people, it seems, across various modes, really going back to the pandemic.
Well, as I mentioned, we have to look at this question through two lenses, the international lens and the domestic lens. And internationally, peak season was very weak. There was no peak. Volume peaked in July and continued down. It troughed in November, very significantly down. Had a bit of a recovery in December, but the peak was missing in action when it comes to international. The domestic side looked actually fairly normal from a seasonal perspective. Uh, so there was a bit of a peak season, but what's interesting is that both for international and domestic, we saw a relatively strong December. And in fact, if you look at the AAR numbers, the strongest week in the year was in December.
Okay.
And that's been the case now for 3 years straight. So what that tells me, and I had been sort of cautious in adopting this viewpoint, is that there's a new normal when it comes to December, and I would say probably due to e-commerce and other sort of fast reaction type moves, that December has become stronger than what was previously regarded as normal.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
so I think that is something that I think after three examples is something that I'm going to call a bit of a trend.
Absolutely. Let's shift gears over to the service side, Larry. How do you view the current state of intermodal service levels?
Intermodal service as we roll into 2026 is in an excellent shape. Train speeds are high. Not that I think that's necessarily that important, but what is interesting is that one of the things that the Surface Transportation Board has the railroads report on every week is the number of intermodal trains on average that are being held in the terminals for various reasons, and the three categories that the STB asked for are lack of crews, lack of power, meaning locomotives, and other reasons. And the good news here is that the number of trains that are being held in terminals is at historically low levels. Very few trains. I think that on average, and I'm just pulling the data up, the first couple of weeks of uh, of the year, we're somewhere in the vicinity of five.
Okay.
And normal for this time of year would be something more like 25 or 30.
Oh, significant.
So what this indicates is that the railroads have entirely adequate supplies of crews and power available to move these trains, because a very small number of trains, I think, uh, an average in the most recent week of one train was being held for crew, none for power, and three for other reasons, and that could be mechanical or line blockages or anything else.
Okay.
So this is really a positive indication. And I think the bigger, longer term story here is that we went through a pretty disruptive 2025 with all of the tariff push pull and surges and troughs. And it would have been easy, I think, for the system to get bound up, but it didn't. So
Okay.
I think there are some lessons that have been learned here, and perhaps the railroads are being not quite as quick on the trigger to reduce crews when traffic turns down, and so we are seeing the effects of that in the service side.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had mentioned tariffs, Larry. I know in previous podcasts we've discussed them extensively, given especially over 2025, where there was a lot of stops and starts or push and pulls and sh really rapid shifts and policy decisions, etc. But I think the big news related to tariffs, especially these days, is the pending, whenever that may be, some say it's going to be later this month, the pending Supreme Court ruling on the White House's implementation of its IEPA tariffs. They're either going to rule, the Supreme Court that is, they're going to rule against the tariffs, or they'll rule in the White House's favor to keep them in place. So it's kind of like an A and a B scenario. How do you sort of view the potential outcomes, whether the court rules for or against the IEPA tariffs, in terms of what it means for intermodal, of course?
Sure, sure. So, well, I mean, I think that to be honest, I can't, I really don't know. Um,
Right.
certainly the Supreme Court is approaching the question, and I'll put it charitably, a leisurely fashion, given the urgency of it. They don't seem to really be in a hurry to issue a ruling. Uh, the administration has signaled that if there is an adverse ruling, that they'll just figure out a different way to um, to skin the cat, so to speak.
Hmm.
And so, surely there will be, if the ruling is adverse, there will be, a tremendous amount of turmoil regarding repayment, and is there repayment and how does that happen? But I don't really see that impacting the intermodal picture at all. Certainly, it's of great importance to the BCOs, and the people that paid these tariffs. But in terms of intermodal, the question is, are there going to be additional surges created by a rollback? If there isn't a rollback, then I think status quo persists. And in general, I think the BCOs, have I'll say perhaps become a bit fatigued at trying to react to the various turns and twists that the administration has constantly presented them with
Yes.
regard to tariffs. And the problem is that these changes are coming in such rapid fire fashion that even if you do try to react, the chances are that by the time the changes actually take hold, the tariff situation will have changed dramatically in the interim. So, I think that there's more of a steady as you go a situation right now with regard to seasonality and businesses have stopped trying to game the tariff timing. Now, if there's a rollback and it appears that there's going to be a period of no tariffs before, and that's certainly possible because whatever the alternative tariff arrangement that the administration might try and put into place, there are procedures that will need to be executed that will take time because those options don't have, I'll say, the unilateral kind of authority that Trump is trying to execute here with the current tariff structure, where everything's an emergency and therefore he has the ability to change tariffs on a dime. These alternative arrangements would not allow that. There was going to be a lead time analysis required and a procedures followed. And so there might be a period of time where the tariffs are relaxed, and perhaps people will try and again jam through if that period of time looks to be long enough. You
Yeah.
might see something of a surge.
Okay. All right. That's going to be interesting to monitor. Absolutely. Um, Larry, obviously, one of the most major stories, if not the most major story, I guess, outside of tariffs, would be perhaps the proposed historic merger between the two Class One railroads, in this case, Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern. Obviously, this deal has a long way to go before it potentially crosses the finish line. But when you look at it now with the information that we have, how do you sort of view the deal? And how do you view the deal through an intermodal lens?
Well, I mean, if you look at the now rejected as inadequate uh, initial submission to the STB, a very significant amount of the growth that the merger proponents or acquisition proponents, I guess I should really say, because it's an acquisition, not a merger, UP acquiring
Yes,
NS.
yes.
A big chunk of that is intermodal. And I would point out that these railroads, and particularly UP, which will be end up being the dominant party, have really not demonstrated the ability to grow intermodal uh, for years and years. So, I'm not saying that it's it's not possible that they will grow it. I think there are certainly opportunities to grow. Oliver Wyman did a detailed analysis as part of the merger submission to the STB, showing where they thought a single line uh, operation could bring volume back off the highway that currently is not moving intermodal. And in general, I would agree that the way that the railroads operate today, that there is an advantage to having a single line haul as
Okay.
opposed to a interchange. Uh, the percentage of intermodal that involves two railroads has dropped significantly over the years, down from, let's say, 22% of intermodal activity uh, 20 years ago down to about 15% now. So that most of the volume is single line, and you get things like rubber tire transfer in Chicago, where the Western Railroad delivers the container to Chicago, it's grounded, driven across Chicago, put back up on a train, and proceeds further east. This is from a individual railroad standpoint much simpler to execute, but it produces a much higher cost structure for the intermodal user because you're adding terminals and chassis and crosstown dray into the equation that is not there if you have a steel wheel interchange. And certainly the UP is saying that by acquiring it, as they would increase the amount of steel wheel interchange, and that theoretically is going to prove to be more attractive to the shipping community, to the tune of about 1.1 million truckloads or even more, converting over a 3-year period. I would,
Yeah.
and all of that mostly is going to be domestic, and none of that, or very little of it, is going to be international. So that would be a very dramatic increase in the combined railroads domestic intermodal business. And so I would say, I guess I would say I would be from Missouri on that. Show me.
Yeah.
I think that it is very speculative to say that in the absence of other changes to the way that intermodal is being operated, uh, to say that that kind of growth is going to suddenly materialize after many, many years of no growth.
Okay. Well put. And this just as an aside, obviously, the Surface Transportation Board recently, not recently, but last year, President Trump appointed Patrick Fuchs as the new chair, replacing Marty Oberman, who had been there for a few years. And how do you sort of view that appointment and the sort of any new direction or approaches that the STB may be taking under Patrick Fuchs' leadership?
Well, I would say that so far they've certainly have had a big focus on I'll say speeding the proceedings, clearing the decks of some of the long-standing issues that were out there. I think that uh, the decision that was issued regarding potentially more reciprocal switching or limited open access was an interesting approach, and certainly the question that everybody is asking is whether the STB is going to be able to maintain its theoretical independence from the executive branch, from
Yep.
what the Trump administration might desire. And certainly we're seeing a test of that right now with regard to the Federal Reserve. I'm not saying that the STB is the equivalent, but in some respects it is because it is theoretically an independent agency like the Federal Reserve and not an agency that's subordinate to the executive branch. So, whether or not the administration has actually a position regarding the NSUP acquisition is one question, and then what STB will toe the line there if there is one to be towed is another question. And of course, there are outstanding issues that are also being adjudicated with regard to the dismissal by the Trump administration of one of the Democratic members of the board, which is currently in the courts.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Robert Primus, I believe that was.
That's correct, right?
Right. Two more quick ones here, Larry. Uh, Coming up in July, later this year, the USMCA trade agreement, among the United States, Mexico, and Canada, our southern and northern neighbors, will be up for review. Um, it's hard to in many cases it's kind of hard to get a read on what may or may not happen. There's definitely some animosity there between President Trump and Canadian PM Mark Carney, as an example. But without getting into the political weeds, how do you sort of view what could be in store for the future of USMCA?
I just honestly have no idea because, in a normal world, personal relationships between the two great nations should not really be affecting this question.
Sure.
And I would point out that when the USMCA was enacted, President Trump said it was the greatest trade deal ever created, or something
Right.
to that effect. So where this goes, the one cannot escape the conclusion that under the current um, situation, that tariffs had become a sort of like the Swiss Army knife of international relations, where any time that the United States seems to not appreciate an aspect of a foreign power's conduct, that a tariff becomes the go-to method of punishment or incentive to bring the behavior of that other nation into what we view as more in line. So this USMCA situation, which normally in more normal times would have been just a product of economic considerations, job creation, and the normal sort of tariff considerations, now could be subject to items that are completely afield, drug drug performance or personal slights. So
Hmm.
we just have no idea where that's going to go.
Yeah.
Other than I would say from a BSO perspective, they need to be ready for some turbulence there.
Okay, understood. And just to wrap up, I thought we could touch upon the Red Sea shipping situation. Obviously, I think it was late 2023. The Houthi pirates started basically attacking commercial ships. For reasons related to the Israel-Palestine conflict, and that caused a lot of rerouting as vessels stopped transiting through the Red Sea, and they were alternatively going around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, which adds something like 10 to 14 days of extra transit time, and subsequently results in more miles on the sea, more fuel expenses, etc. But now we're seeing that Maersk, for example, and Hapag-Lloyd and CGM uh, are starting to at least test the waters, if you will, and return to Red Sea shipping routes. Now, for how long or what that happens, I guess remains to be seen. But should this become an evolving situation where more and more carriers start to do that, that changes freight flows, right? And I'm wondering how that could aid and or impact intermodal operations with I guess freight flows coming to North America
Right.
and other locations too, obviously.
Well, I'll restrict my comments to the North America, and you described the situation very accurately. We're starting to see these big carriers tiptoe back into the Suez route, and what that does is make the east coast of North America a whole lot closer to places like India and even Southeast Asia than it was before.
Right.
When the Red Sea was blocked, and we had to start going around Africa. The net result was that this was one of the impetuses for an improvement in West Coast share of U.S. Imports. Because as the East Coast became more expensive, that you could say that there's a dividing line between East and West, call it an isoeconomic line where the cost you're indifferent on which way you come, all costs included, including an inventory, longer inventory, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that when the East Coast got more expensive because of the extra sailing, extra fuel, extra days, that line moved further east. So the West Coast was the preferred option for a larger portion of the United States than it had been before. And you saw an increase in West Coast share. That was also exacerbated by the ILA situation on the East Coast
Right.
last year. And so, especially in the latter half of last year, we saw very, a robust share on the West Coast, getting up above 44% of North American imports coming into the U.S. West Coast. That includes Western Canada and the U.S. ports. And now we're down somewhere in the 41% range, and that's uh, before we see the effect of the Red Sea opening. I
Hmm.
would expect to see further downward pressure on West Coast share once that becomes the norm going through the Suez.
Sure.
From an intermodal perspective, that's a headwind because the intermodal share off the East Coast with its shorter lengths of haul is considerably smaller than intermodal share coming off the West Coast. That will be seen mostly in the international or the inland point intermodal IPI side of the house.
Okay. Okay. Great. All right, Larry, this has been great. And it brings us to the end of our allotted time for today's podcast. So, on behalf of Logistics Management Magazine and also the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group, I'd like to say thank you for coming back once again. I believe the sixth time. It puts you in that rarefied air with other the rail and intermodal personalities like our friend Tony Hatch and Ian Jeffries over at the AAR. So you're all in the six club now.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
absolutely. And Larry, I just for if anyone wants to connect with you on LinkedIn, I just want to tell the audience you can find Larry at linkedin.com/IN intermodalist and
Correct.
that's how you can find Larry on LinkedIn. And
Right.
Larry, I know you used to do the intermodal in depth report, and I believe you had told me prior to recording that you at least you recently put out its final issue, and you're now collaborating further with IANA. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, intermodal in depth will continue, but it will continue under IANA auspices, and IANA has a economist now on staff that will be taking over the production of intermodal in depth, and his name is Andrew Seibold, and he will be bringing a wealth of capability to that in terms of understanding some of the basic economics that are driving the freight world beyond my capabilities. I'm just a lowly MBA. He's a PhD. I think IANA has some very exciting plans for improving the product, including interactivity and the ability of subscribers to tailor the results to what they need. So that will be available at intermodal.org. Go on there and but still under the intermodal in-depth title.
Okay.
As for me, if people want to reach me, they can reach me at lawrencejgross@gmail.com. LAW Lawrence J. Gross at gmail.com.
All right,
And
terrific.
Jeff, thank you for the opportunity to once again connect with your listeners. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Larry. And for those of you that are not currently signed up to our podcast, please simply look for the Logistics Management Podcast wherever you get your podcast, and it should pop right up. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day, and we'll catch up with you soon.